Alaskans, wherever you are, welcome to the Must Read Alaska Show. Coming to you from somewhere in Alaska. This is the place where we talk about, you guessed it, Alaska. Where we keep the mainstream media on their toes and where we are standing up for what's right in a world run by leftists. You can find out more by heading over to mustreadalaska.com and also checking out the Must Read Alaska YouTube channel for some really great content. But first, let's get this party started.
Welcome, everybody, to the Must Read Alaska Show. I'm your host, John Quick, coming to you live from somewhere in Alaska. I hope everybody's having a phenomenal day today. The sun is out kind of here on the Kenai Peninsula, which is pretty awesome. And we look forward to lots and lots more sun here this summer. If you want to help keep the lights on here at Must Read Alaska, just go to mustreadalaska.com. On the right-hand side, there's a little donate button. Every $5, $10, $100 helps keep the lights on here at Must Read Alaska. If you want to sponsor the Must Read Alaska show, just email me, John, John, at mustreadalaska.com. We have a very special guest today, Tim Murtaugh. He was the 2020 Trump communications director for the reelection campaign. He also was on the Kelly Chewbacca campaign when she just narrowly lost to Senator Lisa Murkowski. He's got a book out entitled Swing Hard in Case You Hit It, and we're going to talk about that today. Welcome to the Must Read Alaska show, Tim.
John, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, it's going to be exciting to hear a little bit about your story and talk about your book a little bit. First, take me back to the moment that you get the call to consider being the 2020 Trump communications director. What was that moment like? Give us a little insight on peek behind the hood there.
Well, you know, it's pretty funny. In politics, you go through your whole career and you meet a whole bunch of people and you make a lot of friends because you've worked on lots of different campaigns. And I was in the Trump administration. I was working for the Secretary of Agriculture, whose name was Sonny Perdue. And that's actually my first ever trip to Alaska was with Secretary Perdue when he was the Secretary of Agriculture. He ran USDA under President Trump. And we made a trip over the course of July 4th in 2017 or 2018, something like that. So I was working for Sonny Perdue, and I got a text from a friend of mine who I had known from a previous campaign. This is the way things go in politics, who was then working in the White House. His name was Justin Clark. He was working in the Trump White House. And he texted me and said, "Hey, you got time for a call?" So we got on the phone, and he said, "Have you had any interest in joining and signing up for the reelect, which is in politics, that's what, you know, the reelection campaign?" And I said, "Sure." So I went over and talked it over with the campaign manager at the time, Brad Parscale. And over the course of an interview or two and lots of conversations, I got a phone call that said, "Hey, we'd like to bring you on. How would you like to be the communications director?" And I said, actually, the phrase was, "How would you like to be?" I had talked about a variety of different communications jobs, and they called me and said, "How would you like to be the director?" And I said, "Of what?" They said, "Communications." And I said, "Yeah, I'll take it." So, I mean, it was a great thrill. That, you know, if you do political communications, there are two jobs that are at the very top of the mountain. Of course, number one will always be the White House press secretary position. And the other one is to run communications on the reelection campaign for the incumbent president of the United States. So if you are in my line of work, that's basically the top of the mountain. And it was a huge thrill. And I'm very grateful to President Trump for giving me that opportunity.
That's pretty awesome. So what's some of your most memorable maybe moments on the campaign trail for that reelection season?
There are so many. It's really, I mean, COVID was, such a giant thing. And that's not like any moment, of course, that went on for months from when it began through the end of the campaign. And, you know, in large part, it's still going on in some places. So that was, of course, really memorable. But I open the book. I begin at the book at the very beginning, where we're at a Trump rally in Battle Creek, Michigan, the week before Christmas 2019. So it's December 8th, 2019, and we're out there for a rally. And at that same exact time, that same night, back in Washington, D.C., Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats were going to impeach President Trump for the very first time, the first impeachment. And we thought that was going to be a major issue that lasted with us throughout the course of the entire campaign. Of course, at that point, we didn't know anything about COVID. We didn't know that there would be a second impeachment after he was already out of office and all that stuff. So we didn't know. That first impeachment seemed like a big deal at the time. And so while that was going on in Washington, we had to decide in Battle Creek, Michigan, what time the president was going to go out on stage for the rally, because the vote hadn't happened yet and we didn't know. And so we ultimately, we stood backstage and we had to talk about it. And so there I was under the discussions of when do we send the president out on stage? Of course, ultimately it's up to him. And we had this discussion with Brad Parscale, a bunch of people from the White House, President Trump, and Vice President Mike Pence. Ultimately, the decision was made that the president would go out on stage and we would get word to him during his speech as to what happened during the impeachment vote. And so I was standing backstage watching the impeachment of the president of the United States unfold on Fox television backstage. I was standing next to the vice president of the United States watching the impeachment with him. While on the other side of this black curtain that we stood next to, the guy who was getting impeached, Donald Trump, was giving a speech to 12,000 people in Michigan. It was an absolutely surreal experience. And then the vote happened, and we printed up this giant board, put the numbers on the board, and we gave it to Kayleigh McEnany, who at that time was working on the campaign. And she went out into the crowd and held up this big sign that had numbers on it. And the president saw that and said, "Oh, we have some numbers here." And he read them off to the crowd. And that's the story of how the 45th president of the United States learned that he'd been impeached. That's how it happened.
Wow.
It was pretty amazing.
That's a pretty incredible story. So you went on to write this book. It's called Swing Hard in Case You Hit It, My Escape from Addiction and Shot of Redemption on the Trump Campaign. Tell me a little bit about why you wrote it. You alluded to a story in there, but kind of take us back to what spurred you on to write this book.
Well, it's unlike any political book, I would say, that your viewers or listeners have ever read before. It's about politics, and a lot of them are stories from the 2020 Trump campaign, like the one that I just told you about backstage, and lots of stories like that that have never been published before. But the other part of the book is about my decades-long struggle to escape really, really desperate alcoholism. I was a really low bottom, as they say, low bottom alcoholic, and I woke up in jail one day in Fairfax County, Virginia, having been arrested again and waking up, in the drunk tank down there while I was on probation for my second of my 2 DUIs. And less than 4 years after that day, I was flying on Air Force One. And it's about my journey of how I made it from a jail cell to riding on Air Force One and running communications for the president of the United States. And when I was in rehab, and I went to rehab 5 times, I spent a lot of time in the bookstores there, and I always gravitated towards the titles. They had the things that are more clinical, like medical textbooks, that kind of stuff, and those were fine. But the ones that interested me are the ones where it was real people telling their stories about all the crazy stuff that happened to them while they were drinking or using drugs or whatever it was, and how they got out of it. And I decided that if I ever wrote a book, that I was going to write a book like that, because they helped me when I was in rehab and needed to be able to relate to somebody who was going through something similar as what I was going through. And I thought if I ever wrote a book, that's what I want to do, because those books helped me. And so that's why I'm here. Swing Hard in Case You Hit It, which tells lots of political stories, but it's also some sort of head shaking stories about my struggles with alcohol.
That's awesome. So what was it for you that made you finally make the turn to put down the drink? Was it a series of moments, or was there one big one for you?
Well, the last straw was, as I said, I went to rehab 5 times. The last straw was just abject fear, complete fear, because I was facing complete and total personal and professional ruin. That day that I woke up in jail, I had been arrested for public intoxication or some such a charge like that, alcohol-related charge. But as I mentioned, I was on probation for my second of 2 DUIs at the time. I had already served 10 days in jail for that second DUI, but I had 80 days of time suspended hanging over my head. And if I got in any trouble, I would have to go serve those 80 days. I was working on Capitol Hill in Washington at the time for a member of Congress from Pennsylvania. And if I had gotten convicted of that charge, I would have violated my probation and go and serve the 80 days. I would have gotten fired and lost my job by the congressman. And forget about the job, I would have lost my career. Nobody what political communicator could go away to jail for nearly 3 months and then come back and just pick up the career where he left off. My friends and family were disgusted with me. I had just gotten married, I was newly married, and my new wife was about fed up with me. It would have been the end of everything, personally and professionally. And so I just decided that day I absolutely needed to stop, and that no more on that day. And so I went and got some great advice. And before I went to court for this charge, because I couldn't afford to violate probation, I went and did about 100 hours of community service at an animal shelter. I went and had the ignition interlock device installed in my car voluntarily, so I couldn't drive it if I'd been drinking. I went to a zillion AA meetings and had somebody sign a little card to attest that I had been there. And I went to outpatient rehab yet again. And I went into court. We appealed to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor said, "You know what? I will not prosecute this charge, but I don't want to see you anywhere near this courthouse ever again. And so I did not violate probation. I did not go to jail for 80 days, and I have not had another drink since. That was May 16th, 2015. And as we sit here and talk today, that was exactly 9 years ago, my last drink. And I'm proud to say I've made it through. Got two little boys at home, and they have never seen their dad take a drink. I'm very proud of that. But I got to keep it going. I know I'm always one drink away from complete and total disaster. And writing this book keeps it fresh for me every time, and I remember what's at stake.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations on your 9 years sober, folks. We'll put the link to the book in the podcast description. I want to encourage you to go out and buy a copy. I'm going to give a copy of this book away to somebody, the first person to email me and say, I want this book. I want
great.
Tim's
Thank
book. I'm gonna send a copy to them. So jump on your email, folks, and send me an email. The first person to send me an email that says I want Swing Hard, in case you hit it, is going to get a copy. So Tim, you also came up to Alaska. You were on the Kelly Chewbacca campaign. Talk to me a little bit about that experience. Ranked choice voting obviously played a role in who kind of won in that election. Kelly got extremely close, but talk to me a little bit about your experience up here.
Yeah, it was. And I want to point out the Swing Hard, in case you hit it, it's available on Amazon.com right now, or anywhere else you get buy books. That it was a great experience working for Kelly. I still think she was a great candidate and would make a great U.S. senator for the great state of Alaska. It was a lot of fun working on that race. Anytime I do a lot of political consulting in different states around the country, and Alaska was unlike anything else that any other state really that I've been involved in. It was a fascinating race, really, and a lot of our issues and a lot of the stuff that we talked about are so intertwined with Alaska, and also on the national level too, talking about our natural resources and our energy industry. Oil and natural gas, obviously so enormous to the Alaska economy, more so than any other state, really, how Alaska is dependent on that for its state economy. And we just felt like, and we still do, we just felt that Lisa Murkowski was hostile to that and had worked against the interests of Alaskans, that she had sided with people whose policies were clearly and obviously detrimental to Alaska. And we thought those were good arguments, and as you recall, Murkowski's allies had changed the voting system in Alaska and instituted ranked choice voting as sort of a backstop to make sure that everything completely and totally favored Lisa Murkowski. And it really works against trying to get good, solid conservatives like Kelly Chewbacca elected to statewide office in Alaska. And I think it presents a real barrier to that. And, I see other states toying with the idea of picking up the idea of the practice of ranked choice voting. And I just think it's a disaster, because it really is a way that the system, just through the basic math of it and how it all works, the system really, it's a sort of in our case, in that Senate race, it was an incumbent protection racket. And that's the way that it served. That's why they instituted it. No one was, trying to be cagey about it. They changed the law to benefit Lisa Murkowski, and it worked. It was very frustrating. I think Kelly deserved better, but it was wonderful to be associated with Alaska and to go up there and visit and help out. And I would do it again in a second.
Nice. So before we run out of time here, I want to get your thoughts on this upcoming presidential election. Trump's out there running again. Obviously, President Joe Biden's running. What are your thoughts and predictions on who's going to take the W for this year's presidential election?
Well, if the election were today, Donald Trump would win, I think, quite handily, because if you see all these swing state battleground polling that's coming out, states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, swing states that were key, and states that were all of them won by Joe Biden in 2020. Donald Trump has a clear lead in almost all of these states outside the margin of error, and a slight lead, within the margin in the others. And so I think right now, if the election were today, that Donald Trump would be reelected. Now, that said, there's an awfully long way to go. And I know personally that anything can happen in a space of about 6 months. You have no idea what twists and turns this election is going to take. I assume that it will take those elections. It will take some twists and turns. But I think the whole thing shapes up really nicely for Donald Trump, and for the main reason that everyone who's going to vote in this election has already lived through both presidencies. Everyone who will vote has experienced Donald Trump being president and Joe Biden being president. And I think if you stack up those presidencies side by side and talk about the economy, the border, national security, public safety, the world situation, is the world on fire? Yes or no? And I think if you stack up the Trump administration versus the Biden administration, it's a clear win for Donald Trump. So I think if people are voting on the issues and not what the media whips them up into being, emotional about, then I think that Donald Trump wins all day long. Again, it's a long way to go, but right now I'd rather be Donald Trump than Joe Biden.
Yeah. So I appreciate you joining us today. Tim, you have any last minute thoughts before we head off here?
I really do appreciate the opportunity, John, and I would encourage people that everyone that I've talked to, either they themselves has had a problem with addiction or they know someone who has. I think this is not a how-to book about how to get sober. It's just my story. It's how I got through it, how I went from waking up in jail to flying on Air Force One. Swing hard in case you hit it. My escape from addiction and shot at redemption on the Trump campaign. Pick it up on Amazon. I would really appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Tim. Folks, if you just caught the tail end here, I want to encourage you to go back and listen to the whole thing. Tim Murtaugh shares with us his 2020 communication director role in the Trump campaign, and then how he went on to write Swing Hard in Case You Hit It, a great book that highlights some of his time on the Trump campaign and his recovery from addiction. So, folks, I'll put the link for that book in the podcast description. And the first person to email me that says, I want this book, they're going to get a copy of it. So, Tim, we hope you have a phenomenal rest of the day. And folks out there listening, if you want to help to keep the lights on here at Must Read Alaska, just go to mustreadalaska.com. On the right-hand side, there's a little donate button. If you want to sponsor the Must Read Alaska show, just email me, John, JOHN, at mustreadalaska.com. Until next time, I'm John Quick from somewhere in Alaska. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, John.